So excited to be back with you for these last two sessions today and tomorrow. So like Carol said, this is our Teach Me session. So all of the information, you can get it in the Google Classroom. That's where our Padlet is as well. So all of the PowerPoints are now up for the 4 sessions, as well as all the resources that you'll see today. And Amy?
Okay, we actually address the development of this book in a little more depth than the other 2 sessions if you've had a chance to watch those. We just wanted to say that with this book, it's been our joy to be able to share as colleagues what we have learned from our own classrooms and from the hundreds of students and teachers that we've had the opportunity to work with. We also want to make sure that we say that we are still growing and learning in this area, and we're thrilled that you've joined us on this journey. The students that we address in this book are students from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, English language learners, economically disadvantaged students, students from under-resourced rural areas, and twice exceptional students. Another thing that we wanted to make sure that we brought out in this session, it was based on a great question from the last session, who we're talking about when we talk about gifted or high potential learners. So we want to clarify that we use these words interchangeably in our presentations, high potential and gifted. And we basically are talking about any students who are already identified as gifted. We're talking about students who have been identified for your talent pools. We're talking about students who have not yet been identified but will be at some point. And then we are also talking about those students that we may never be able to formally identify for gifted programs, and yet we're seeing those strengths that we need to nurture and develop. First 2 sessions were 2 weeks ago. First one was See Me. Second one was Understand Me. Again, hopefully you've been able to access those, or you will be able to. Today we're going to have the Teach Me session, and then tomorrow we will have Challenge Me. And we're throwing in a little bit of Advocate for Me also. One thing that we talked about last session was how beneficial it can be, how validating it can be to students when you ask them what they need from you, and then try and honor those small requests that are at all possible for you to honor. Based on the feedback that we got from quite a few of you after the second session, we have tried to honor some of those small requests in our presentation today. One of those being that we've added a 3-minute break in the middle so that you can get away from us for a few minutes and do what you need to do. We've added some deeper breakout questions. We've added examples of learning activities from elementary, some from the earlier grades. We've added several examples of student-led learning activities. And then we've also added a column for extra resources in the Padlet that we'll make sure that we upload information from today and tomorrow into. Another thing that was requested was to be able to talk about how we do all of this now that we are remote. And first, we don't know for sure how to do everything remote. We are really working on trying to figure that out. We had the opportunity this summer to move our summer enrichment programs for pre-K through 12th grade from from face-to-face to online. So we had a huge learning curve in that process on how to engage them initially and get their voices in the room, and some things that we needed to do to really make sure that it was beneficial for them. But again, this is still really an area of growth for us too. How do we take what we know is best practice face-to-face and then figure out how to make that work in a remote setting? But we'll try and point out as we go places where it works well to incorporate into an online learning environment. And actually all of the handouts, or at least I think all the handouts we have posted, they are already set up so that students can just type into them. So that may be the one thing that helps. We also are glad, it doesn't bother us at all if you take some of these surveys and you put them into Google Forms or something like that in order to get information back from students if that helps you in any way. Jenny, was there anything else on online, transition to online, that you wanted to say?
No, you covered everything I was thinking.
So we start the Teach Me unit with a quote from Temple Grandin. I think there's too much emphasis on deficits and not enough emphasis on developing abilities. And we so believe that from the very depths of our hearts. We also talked about a strategy last week, again, asking the kids the best way in a safe learning environment to get to know your kids and understand them is to ask them about themselves. So this is actually a strategy that I used for years with my students who'd been, who were in my classes and or identified for gifted education programming, and would just ask them, besides what we know about you from your assignments and from your test scores, what else do you really want me and other teachers to know about you? And so we pulled some quotes that were actually from students that would be considered belonging to a group that's traditionally underrepresented in gifted education. So the first quote that we pulled when we asked them what else we needed to know was, "I can't learn through lectures and diagrams alone. I need to have an entertaining source and hands-on experience to learn something. It's not a preference, it's just who I am. I am an extreme visual and physical learner." And the second quote we pulled, "I feel like being in the honors algebra class is a waste of my time. We were put here based on assessment data from last year, but we do the same thing the regular algebra class is doing. We just have to complete more worksheets. Doing more of the same thing over and over again is killing me. I'd rather just stay in the regular class and only have to practice the questions once." So we thought these both fit well with our Teach Me theme for today.
So when we came up with how we wanted to organize this chapter of the book, this chapter and the Challenge Me chapter, we came up with acronyms for to frame the strategies. So we need to show our students that we care. So teaching underserved students to the best of our ability requires that we care deeply. That is why we chose acronym CARE to organize the strategies that we're going to present to you in this presentation. So when we talk about care, we talk about needing to connect learning to our students' lives. We talk about ability grouping students flexibly. We talk about respectfully differentiating for our students. We talk about engaging students in higher level thinking. And some of the things that we talk about today, we will dig into deeper tomorrow in the Challenge Me section. When we talk about connecting learning to students' lives, in the past sessions, we talked about the importance of connections, which Amy and I greatly believe are just vital. We need to connect to our students' lives. We need to form connections with our students' families. So we need to create lessons that have real world applications by allowing students to create projects that are intended for an authentic audience, and by representing and honoring students' unique experiences and learning activities. So one of the most important things that we can do is help students connect with the future. When we look at student motivation, and just underachievement tends to be one of my research areas, and I know in the survey it was mentioned, information on that would be great. We look at motivation being comprised of something we call goal valuation or task meaningfulness. And with task meaningfulness, students need to be able to see some type of future, application to their lives in order to really kind of just have buy-in and be motivated to learn within a particular activity. So many of our underserved high potential learners may have limited exposure to the wide array of careers available. The environments in which our students grow up often define the career opportunities that they see. So one activity that Amy actually has done with her students that we shared is just setting a time, side time for students to visit the Bureau of Labor Statistics Career Exploration website, which looks a little bit like this and has a wealth of resources. And to encourage students to keep their search results. And I actually am doing this with my daughter right now, and we're doing it in a Google Doc, but results in an online or paper portfolio. And their interests may evolve over time, so it's important to encourage them to revisit the site and the information they've collected as they get older. My daughter has a tendency to just want to, I'm not interested in this anymore, so I'm just going to delete it. And I keep telling her, I'm like, no, let's keep it. You know, our interests tend to change, you know, as we mature, as we learn more. But it's just important to collect all of that information and to see like a future that, you know, we get really excited about, and maybe a future, you know, that we would never even have dreamed for ourselves. Amy, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you're good. So.
Okay. So I'm going to turn this over to Amy now.
We really like the work of Dr. Banks. A lot of it was actually completed in the 90s, I believe, so it's been around for a while, and it could be a presentation in and of itself easily. But we wanted to share certain aspects of it that we felt were particularly important, primarily his 4 approaches to multicultural education. The first approach that he talks about is a contribution approach. With this approach, educators are basically fitting in maybe a day or even a week in order to honor another culture or an individual who would be representative of a different culture in some way. So, for example, celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. Day would be an example of this. Sometimes we call it Heroes and Holidays. So we've got the Heroes and Holidays approach to multicultural education. It's important to realize that this is a first step. It's not that it's wrong or bad. Everybody has to start someplace, and it's with the best of intentions that teachers start to pull in these different experiences for their students. However, with the contributions approach, rather than becoming an integral part of the curriculum, it's very short term and it lacks depth and that larger context. For example, you don't get a global perspective. You don't understand the struggle against racism and power that's taken place with this group of people potentially. Because of this, it perpetuates that notion of misconceptions about certain groups of people. Because of this, again, it just needs to be the starting place. There's room for growth. There's room to bring in those lived experiences and to really validate students' lives within the classroom, in the curriculum. The second step to this is the ethnic additive approach. With this approach, there's increased exposure to content and concepts, to themes, to different perspectives. However, at this point, it's still all told through mainstream Eurocentric lens. So we're seeing writings, we're seeing art, we're seeing other types of work, but we're seeing what's been put together, what's been developed, what's been created by mainstream historians or artists or scientists. So good next step. To build upon that is his transformative approach. With this approach, it really allows students to view issues, themes, problems, concepts from an ethnic perspective or point of view. And it requires a change in the assumptions of the curriculum, because now we're no longer looking at these things through the white Eurocentric lens. We've shifted it, and we're able now to see it through the lens of those marginalized and oppressed populations, through their words, through their works. And so it's a different perspective. And then the fourth approach is the decision-making and social action approach. With this, we move beyond, understanding, that cognitive or intellectual understanding, and we put students in a position to be able to choose an issue of concern to their community, and then to figure out a way to take action. This is a great way to build empathy and self-efficacy while incorporating higher level thinking and decision-making skills. So again, we just wanted you to see the progression of these different approaches to multicultural education and how one builds upon the next. And then we wanted to touch on the social action portion of this, because we feel like through service learning, it's a really great way to get into this 4th level once that foundation is in place for these other levels of approach. Again, this is a bigger concept than we have time to fully delve into. My guess is that some of you have already had experience with this. Some of you may have expertise in this that you'd be willing to share even in your smaller breakout sessions. But we found this to be very, very powerful for students. Service learning helps them to develop empathy and leadership skills, and reinforces that students can be active contributors within their own communities and the larger society. They need to know that they have the power to make a difference. And this is just one strategy that we really feel lends itself to that. Steps for this, just very, very briefly, would start with a community-wide survey. So based on these approaches, they want to find out what's an issue within their community. And community can be the classroom. It can be very small depending upon the age of your students and how you're defining community. But it's a collaborative approach to figuring out what the most pressing issue is from the community perspective. So it's very important that you are valuing that voice and you are not stepping in and trying to fix them or fix their problem in a way that they may not value, that may not be beneficial to them. So it's a collaborative point. You're listening to get feedback. So it's good for them to go through that process. Next step is the action planning phase, where they would create a goal for the project based on the feedback that they got from the community. You'd work together to create actionable steps, things that they can work through one at a time, as well as a blueprint for success. And blueprint, what we're talking about here are the steps. Now the blueprint is what has to happen for each of these steps to take place. It might be that you're helping with the organization, you're helping with the schedules, you're maybe helping them reach out to other people that can provide some of that structure, that foundation, in order for those actionable steps to happen. Implementation, so they actually work in a small group with a partner. They can each have different, it can be a common goal that they've identified, and different groups working on different aspects of it. There are all different ways that you can organize the implementation, but that's the really fun part. So implementation is carrying out those action steps. And then we think reflection is so important in every aspect of learning. We even build it into our graduate classes. They're for our students to just have time to reflect and respond and goal set. So very briefly, again, these are the steps to that social action through service learning that really get to the depth of a multicultural approach to education, according to Dr. Banks.
So now we're just going to transition into ability group students flexibly. So again, probably something that many of you have some knowledge about, but we just want to talk a little bit more in depth about what we mean by it in the book and give you some strategies for it. So grouping based on potential or demonstrated achievement is what we're talking about when we're talking about ability grouping. We're also talking about grouping by interest. We're talking about grouping by need. So it really needs to be based on whatever our educational objectives are. There are going to be times when we're ability grouping based on demonstrated achievement. So that will require looking at academic growth. There will be times when we're ability grouping to actually, increase like collaboration skills or other social emotional skills. So depending on what our objective is we need to know our objective. We shouldn't just group for the sake of grouping. Grouping should be intentional. And then it provides the opportunity to demonstrate and develop strengths of our students as well. And in a bit, we'll talk about grouping by need and incorporating mini lessons and doing some front-loading activities. So when we talk about grouping, we are talking about flexible grouping, we are not talking about tracking. We think that ability grouping often becomes synonymous with tracking. And we strongly believe that these groups need to be flexible. So they can change based on a lesson or unit to increase academic challenge and the emotional engagement of our students. So when some students show that they're ready for challenge, they move into a group. When we believe that some students can rise to the challenge with extra support, and that'll increase, their engagement, then, they have access to the group. So we need to know our students. We need to know our students. We need to know their strengths. We need to know their interests. We need to know their learning preferences. So when we talk about grouping by interest, these groups tend to be very engaging, meaningful to the students. They can build a stronger classroom community. They provide us with options as the teacher to build in options for choice for our students. We mentioned 3 different groups, and we'll talk to you more about the independent research group today, especially since you're doing school-wide enrichment model, and more about independent investigations as well tomorrow. But, with the expert group, that gives students the opportunity to hone in on a topic related to whatever the objectives are for the lesson or the unit, and to become, more proficient in it, and teach others about it. Perspectives group might be where different people take on a role related, again, to the educational objectives or the learning objectives for the unit or lesson. That they're excited about taking. So maybe they, want to take on the role of a scientist or of an advocate or of a journalist. And what's cool about this is that you can then have students then, represent different perspectives and then group them together so that you get those different perspectives. Those opposing an issue, those for an issue, those undecided about an issue. The independent research group, again, that's just more systematic. It doesn't have to be related to a particular lesson or learning unit. And we will give you an example of that and some resources for that. When we talk about grouping by need, Amy will talk to you a little bit more about front loading and targeted mini lessons. Front loading tends to be a strategy that we don't use enough. It's especially important and impactful in the earlier grades where, we give students the skills, access to knowledge, resources that they're going to need so that when they get to higher levels, higher grades, they feel like they have higher self-efficacy, they can embrace challenge, they have more confidence. Social emotional needs, sometimes, like I said before, it might be important to group with the idea that there are some kids that are maybe not so confident in a certain area, and we want to develop, their self-advocacy skills. Like, we want them to feel that they have something to say, and we want to give them the opportunity to learn how to communicate effectively. So that's another way to intentionally group by need. And then there's also learning preferences. So we will give you a learning needs survey that's a fillable survey. Like Amy said, most of our resources will show you their fillables, so that you can find out where students feel like, this is something that I need a little bit more, targeted support in, and then we can potentially group students that way to be able to provide them with that support. And then there's the grouping by potential or demonstrated achievement. We can certainly use testing data for this, but we always say, we need to look beyond tests. So we need to look at our own observations for when we do any kind of grouping. And if we see a student that we think can thrive in a particular, grouping arrangement that is based on demonstrated achievement or potential, then we need them to give them the opportunity to do so. And then we will talk about the 2 main types of ability grouping, which are between class and within class ability grouping. So this is just one of our examples of just having an independent research group. So several students are constantly finishing their math course classwork early. Their teacher offers them the opportunity to conduct independent research over the course of the 3-week unit once they've completed their classwork. Through an interest survey and informal discussion, the teacher helps the student zero in on a topic they all seem passionate about. They all want to research sports in depth. One student wants to focus on sports medicine, another on Jackie Robinson, another on women's participation in sports over time. They decide to create a combined product based on all of their research, which is an interactive online sports museum the entire school can access. So a really exciting just extension activity that's not necessarily related to the unit, to the lesson, but has the kids doing something that they're excited about, you know, and not just kind of sitting there, you know, bored, waiting, you know, for the teacher to tell them what to do next. So when we allow independent research, we allow students the autonomy to choose a topic they're passionate about. We let students work together to research various aspects of a topic they share interest in. Again, topics need not be related to academic standards. We need to ensure that students are investigating a topic that they can share with a real audience. Having some kind of online interactive, you know, museum through a Padlet or through whatever you're using for that has a larger reach, you know, where other people can actually leave feedback and comment. So beyond the classroom, beyond the group. The topic should be researchable and feasible within the time parameters. Sometimes kids have kind of these big ideas, and sometimes we need to reel them in and just make sure what they want to do is feasible given the time constraints and the resources. So another good kind of activity for independent research is to help them develop a higher level question to guide their research. And we'll talk, I have a really nice resource, Amy and I have a great resource that we'll share with you later for that. And then create some kind of learning contract for the investigation steps. So a timeline for completion, ideas for the end product. Individual products are certainly okay too. They don't have to do something as a group. Let them choose. Your role in supporting the investigation, because you should still be facilitating and guiding this, and an evaluation plan. We'll share with you later, I know I keep saying that, but we'll share with you later process rubrics that we think are actually really, really good to honor the process involved in work like this. And then let students work alone if other students do not share their passion. So with any kind of grouping, if you're not assessing a particular skill, you know, related to the grouping, I think Amy and I would both concur that it is important to give students the option to work alone. Amy, is there anything else? Because I know you've done really targeted research in that area that you want to say about that.
Nope, I think that was a good lead in to what we have here. So grouping by need. Jenny mentioned that we were going to talk about front loading as one of the strategies, and we know that front loading, especially in the early years, early elementary years, is very, very impactful in helping to make sure that students have that foundation, not only at that point in time, but also to help backfill some of the skills and background knowledge that they need in order to be successful, and then build on that year after year. However, it's also important at every level to front load when needed. I've especially seen this in situations where I have a second language learner that might need to see ahead of time the question. These are the questions that we're going to ask tomorrow, or here's the material that we're going to look at. So they have an opportunity to see it and practice it, even practice the language that they would use to share their ideas ahead of time, so that they are comfortable when the time comes in doing that, or at least more comfortable. Students who hesitate to share in class, giving them options to practice or do things ahead of time can be really, really beneficial in making them feel part of the community and actually getting their voices in the room. So when we talk about front loading, we're talking about any type of pre-teaching or advanced preparation that we provide for students in order for them to feel comfortable, to get the skills that they need, to get the information that they need, to really engage in learning and with the learning community, because we feel that that's so important to be part of that learning community. And that pre-teaching can be actually providing them background information. This is what you need to know to make sense of what's coming up tomorrow, or what we're going to be reading next week. It can be providing that academic vocabulary, teaching it very specifically. It can be higher level thinking, guided reading. So where you're actually having them think through some of the higher level questions that we may be discussing so that they already have ideas in place. Different types of graphic organizers. Hearing you think through how you would process something is great front loading for many of these students. So anything that you're doing to prepare them ahead of time to be successful and with the curriculum or the assignment or the activity and to engage in the learning is what we were talking about when we say front loading. The second strategy that we talk about that's really important when we're talking about grouping by need is embedding mini lessons in group work or sometimes even individually. This is for the purpose of either something they need to complete the product successfully or something that they need to learn or be able to do in order to process the activity. It's very targeted skill development. It can be really quick. It can be 5 minutes. It can be 10 minutes. It might be a longer mini lesson, but it's very targeted. It's often based on either misconceptions that you've seen in the past with other students or misconceptions that you're picking up on as you're listening and you're walking around. You're seeing what they're saying and what they're doing. So if there are misconceptions that you need to fix immediately, that would be a just-in-time mini lesson. Okay, hold on, let me tell you about this. Let me explain this. You need this. So it's just in time, wasn't pre-planned necessarily, but they have to have it in order to be successful with this. Many of them, like I said, may be pre-planned just based on your own expertise and experience. They can also be mini lessons to provide extension or enrichment for certain students that might need it. So you've got this, let me tell you what else we could do, or let me tell you what next steps would be. Let me have 15 minutes with you, 10 minutes with you, and let's see what else we can help you learn. So those are two primary ways that you can group by need in order to help students be successful in your classroom. We have designed a learning needs survey. Like we said, it's fillable for your students. In a safe classroom, we say that a lot, but unless students feel really safe in your classroom, they're not going to be willing to share what they need with you. This is a way for them to very quickly go through and share with you things that they feel like they are needing to be successful in your classroom. For example, I know it's probably hard for you to see, one of the statements on here is, I need help with goal planning and strategy development. That is a great thing to know. If you've got kids that need help with that, you could target them early. You can target them anytime you know that that's going to be a skill that they're going to have to demonstrate to be successful. So this is something we've uploaded for you.
I will also add, with any of these, if you need to adapt them to make the language just more approachable for younger students, you for sure have our permission to do so. And some of the things we'll share with you, we actually uploaded as Word documents. So not this per se, but we'll point out to you just so that you can adapt it for your population in a way that'll be more helpful than possibly the way we have it presented.
And we'd love to know too, if you see things on here and you go, oh, you need to be asking this, or this is something teachers need to be asking, we love feedback like that. So if there are things that you're asking or things you think we need to add, let us know.
So when we're talking about grouping by demonstrated potential or documented achievement, we're talking about grouping students who have similar strengths. Testing data can help with this, but even the best designed test, we know for sure, may not identify the strengths or potential of our underserved students. So we need to make sure we're taking a more multidimensional approach to our grouping, and we often need to rely on our own classroom observations and the information that we're collecting from our students in order to determine what would be an appropriate placement. And again, these groups are flexible. So when we see that a student can potentially take on more challenge, then we want to give them that opportunity. So as I said before, we're talking about within class ability grouping and between class ability grouping when we're distinguishing ability grouping. So within class ability grouping is creating those groups with your own students in your own classroom, whereas between class ability grouping is the practice of separating students into different classrooms based on academic ability or past performance. These students go into the compacted math class for their math. So that would be an example of between class ability grouping, but again, grouping should be flexible.
Okay, culturally responsive literature circles. We have a lot of materials that we just want to share with you, so I'm not going to talk really in depth about this. I imagine most people have probably had experience with literature circles or Socratic seminars, so it's the same idea. One thing that we have tried to do is to pull in opportunities for students to make deep connections to their own lived experiences, to increase that engagement and to increase leadership opportunities. Part of this can be done through student-led groups. If you do that in these literature circles, it's really important that they have a lot of modeling and support going into them so that they can be successful and the group can be successful. So I want to make sure that I make that point. These can be used for really short-term projects, a single reading. It can be used for a novel. There are different ways to organize them. We have examples where each student would be in a different type of role. Probably each time they met, they would take on a different role, or maybe after a couple times so that they have practice with it. Similar, I'm sure, to things that you've seen in the past. I discussion leader, summarizer, wordsmith, key passage locator, connector, artistic interpreter, and then culture explorer. Key passage locator and artistic interpreter, it's really important, really interesting to make sure that they provide the rationale for why they chose what they chose. So what are those personal connections that they made? And then culture explorer is an extension within these groups where someone identifies cultural similarities and differences between the characters in the story. So different characters in the story, or between characters and their own lives. And then that's part of the discussion. Again, it needs to be a very safe place to do that. So that has to be developed ahead of time, and it needs to be modeled in practice. These are a couple of activities that I would do with my 6th graders when I was teaching middle school. You can tell by the titles of the books that this was a while ago, probably, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago. So the texts haven't been updated, but I wanted to pull in actual examples of some of the things that I did in order to have some of those discussions, those connections. So the first one is an example of a graphic organizer that I used with the book Rising Voices, Writings of Young Native Americans. And for each segment that we read, well, first we'd identify the cultural group represented, but then what was really interesting, a good discussion, was that each person on their own, they would give examples of important personal issues that they found in the text. What are personal issues that the characters are dealing with? What are examples of larger social issues that the characters in the text are dealing with? And then they had to make connections to themselves. How can I relate to that? In what ways can I relate to the personal issues that some of these people are having? How can I relate to the social issues? So it's recognizing and valuing those differences, but then it's also figuring out what similarities do I have? How can we connect? How are we similar in some way? The second activity was similar. This was with the House on Mango Street. With this, we were working on summary writing, so they'd start with a short summary of whatever we read, and then same thing, based on what was happening in the characters' lives, they were asked to make a text-to-self connection. So very similar, just different ways to maybe organize. And then discussion expectations. I'm not going to take time to read these, but these are the ones we talked about. Group norms last time. These are actually expectations that my class came up with in order to have these discussions, these types of discussions. And then this is an activity that we have uploaded for you. Similar idea, student evaluation of cultural connections in text. This is very applicable or could be easily modified for elementary, even early elementary, where there are statements like the characters are similar to me and the people I care about. And they're going to say yes, a little, or not at all. And then they need to justify that. Why are they like you? Why do you not think they're like you? Why are they a little bit like you? So just questions that they respond to based on the text. And again, we're trying to make connections and then rationalize it. And with all of these discussions can then take place with a partner, small group, whole class, whatever works for your particular setting. So this is something that you can go in and look at, and hopefully will find useful in developing those relationships within groups as you make those cultural connections.
So we are at the point where we have our first breakout activity, and this is going to be a deeper question that we're going to ask you to engage in with this one. So how do you currently embed, or how have you seen others embed Dr. Banks' 4 approaches to multicultural education? So the contributions, additive, transformative, decision-making, and social action approaches into instructional practices. And then if we could brainstorm ideas for utilizing the transformative and decision-making and social action approaches in your classrooms to empower underserved high potential learners. So how have you seen those embedded? And then what ideas do you have for the transformative and decision-making and social action approaches? And then how is flexible grouping implemented in your school, grade level, and or classroom? And how can these current grouping practices be improved to better meet the needs of your underserved high potential learners? So we are going to give you 15 minutes to break out and discuss these. And I will go ahead and I will try those, but moving on. Respectfully differentiating for students. So that is the 3rd letter of our acronym. So the focus of differentiating for underserved high potential learners should be to provide them with opportunities to feel successful and shine. You may incorporate more choices into how they demonstrate their learning. You may develop grading rubrics that honor the learning process, effort, and growth. And you may chunk larger projects into smaller steps to build students' self-efficacy. So this is a real-world example that I wanted to share with you. So as part of the 8th grade curriculum, Mr. Jackson has taught a dystopian literature unit for years. The students read several dystopian novels, discuss the stories as a class and in groups, take vocabulary quizzes on key terms, watch a dystopian movie, and then write a timed essay connecting the movie to at least 2 of their readings. Recently, one of his colleagues asked, "Are they learning essay writing skills during the unit that need to be assessed?" Mr. Jackson shook his head. His colleague continued, "So are they able to choose other ways to show you what they've learned about dystopian literature?" Mr. Jackson answered, "No, not really. I will say, sometimes our go-to is to have just one way of assessing what our students know. As a former English teacher, I think a go-to a lot of times was to have the kids write an essay. But if essay writing skills, again, for example, are not what you're assessing, are there other ways that students can show you their understanding of the learning objectives?" So I think that's the point with that.
Something else that we know is very empowering for all of our students. We know for our underrepresented gifted learners, this is very impactful. Providing them choice during the day in the curriculum, in what they decide to do, increases motivation, engagement, and sense of empowerment. Kineski and Keeley did some research earlier, and they found that the 5 C's that are necessary for students to engage are caring, teachers, choice, control, challenge, and complexity. So our job as educators is to figure out how to build that into what we're doing with our underserved gifted learners so that we can really see what their strengths are and build on those. Gifted students value when teachers have expertise, so they love that you know what you're talking about, that you have that expertise, but it's still very, very important to them to have choice in what they're being asked to do. They feel very validated and acknowledged. And this is something that we've found in our research. So choice, control, and self-challenge are areas that we also need to really key in on when we're talking about how to meet the needs of our underserved gifted learners. These are actually quotes from students. "My thing is I like having choice, but when it gets too far broad, I feel like I just go crazy. I like structure, I guess. I like having the requirements and expectations, at least of the teachers. And once I have that, I can usually just go crazy with what I want to do. I like having choices, but once I've made my choice, I definitely want more specific instructions, just so I know I'm doing the right thing. Because the most stressful thing for me is waking up in the middle of the night before a big project's due and being like, oh my God, I know I did something wrong. And then the last quote we pulled in, I learn best when I'm given a list of guidelines and expectations. I don't like being told exactly what to do, but I want to be given a path which I can then deviate from. And we felt like these are really important to include because you do hear choice. You know, students need choice. Students need to be able to make decisions for buy-in. And yet this too much choice is just as debilitating and disengaging for them as no choice at all. And one thing that we really need to remember with our high potential underserved learners is that we definitely want to make sure that they have engaging choices, but we have to provide them what they need in order to be successful. So it's choice with that support. How do we provide choice and then support them in being successful with those choices so that they do feel empowered rather than overwhelmed or like they can't be successful within those parameters. Choice boards, again, we know probably a lot of what we're talking about you've already done as educators, but we're pulling in what we have found that we have done and other educators have done that have been really successful with our underserved gifted learners. Choice boards is one thing that we found that does provide some of that structure, but allows choice for our students. Choice boards are menus with options. Sometimes you provide guidance on what they're choosing in order to get them started. You can structure it around the different grouping options that we talked about earlier. The two that we're going to talk about just briefly are tic-tac-toe. Sometimes this is called a think-tac-toe, and the raft. For building the tic-tac-toe activity, it's deciding on that concept or learning objective. So you need to know what it is you're wanting your students to get from the activity. Deciding on the type of tic-tac-toe board. Are you going to focus it on learning preferences, choice of product? We'll look at some other options here in just a minute. You need to always be considering what modifications can you make for those high potential learners. Choice is good, but it has to be able to meet the challenge level that they need as well. So what can you build into that in order to provide the choice and the challenge? You can decide on the parameters. We'll look at some examples of that in just a minute too. And then this is just a note to self, having that due date, because usually choice boards are completed over a period of time. That due date really big on there somewhere is an important thing to include. A tic-tac-toe choice board looks like a tic-tac-toe menu. Many people use that center square as something that is either required for all. So everybody's going to do this grounding activity that gives us some common discussion, or it can be free choice. You don't have to do it. You can do it, but that center one tends to be something that people spend some time determining what they want to do with it. And I can see comments popping in. I can't click over yet to look at them. So I don't know, Jenny, maybe you can kind of see if there are things we need to respond to on there. Options for the tic-tac-toe besides that center board, you could give options for students to complete 1 or 2 squares with a partner. Maybe you designate that these are the squares that you can complete with a partner, or you can say any 1 square you can choose to complete with a partner. This is an example of choice that's still structured, and yet students have some say in how they are completing the activity. This can be expanded to a bingo board, so you can make this as big as you would like it to be. This can be an extension for students who need additional challenge, so this is an option for them to complete after they've done other work or they've compacted out of material. It's not necessarily important that they actually do a tic-tac-toe. You may design it as a tic-tac-toe where everything makes complete sense in your mind, but I recommend if they give you a strong rationale for wanting to complete a certain activity, even if it's out of order, that's something that you consider. Again, that's validating student request, honoring that small request. And then different board, you can have a different board for different groups of students. So it's an easy way to differentiate. It looks like everybody's doing basically the same thing, but you can have very different boards that different groups of students are completing based on interest or need or demonstrated achievement.
You can just have the same board, but you have certain groups of students start different places on the board so that they're forced to complete at least certain activities that would maybe better meet their learning needs. That's it. I thought we had one more in there. And these are just examples of ways in which you might think about structuring boards. Again, there are many ways, but you might structure around levels of Bloom's levels of thinking, Bloom's taxonomy. You might structure around multiple intelligences. So there's just some thought in what types of questions and where you want to structure them in order to make sure that students are answering the types of questions that they need to be answering. So just examples there. We pulled in multiple examples at different levels, and I'm just going to have Jenny kind of, and let me say, most of these are not, we did not create these. These are from our students, or we found other examples. I actually don't know where we got this one. I don't remember, but this was an elementary example of a tic-tac-toe. You can go ahead and flip, Jenny. This is a 6th grade example. This tic-tac-toe for ancient civilization. So we just wanted you to actually have some good representations of tic-tac-toe boards that could be used to meet that choice and challenge. This is one that one of our graduate students actually completed, I think, last year for her middle school math class. So here's another example of what you might do with a tic-tac-toe or think-tac-toe board. This was, I worked with a high school, with some high school social studies teacher, did some professional development with them. This is one that they actually developed and implemented with their students. So this is an example of a high school one. With this one, they decided that the center one was the homework. So everybody came with that. And then they were able to decide how they wanted to meet I think it was 40 points. They had to have 40 points, and they could figure out which activities they wanted to do to complete it. So just a little twist on a regular tic-tac-toe board to provide that choice for students.
Okay. So another thing that we're just going to share with you that you might already have familiarity with is building rafts. So when we talk about rafts, again, most good things they have an acronym. So the R in raft is the role. The role is the perspective that the student assumes to connect with the topic at hand. So for example, the student may take on the role of an investigative reporter to uncover little known information about a particular historical event. The audience is who the student is communicating the information to with their project. So is it perhaps community members who have a vested interest in the topic? I did this with my students and gave them the freedom to actually choose these different things. So I didn't tell them they had to choose, for example, a particular audience, but gave them ideas of an audience they might do a project for. The format is how the student will communicate information with their audience. And again, lots of choice built in. So is it a podcast? Is it artwork? Is it film? Is it creative writing, etc.? So format choices may be left blank so students can propose their preferred format. And then the topic is the focus of the project and connected to the learning objectives. So you might select issues that are relevant to your students' lives, or you might help your students dig deeper into unfamiliar topics so that they become more relevant to your students. This is just a raft I had done with my students. So the role here I had a biographer, artist, research persona, and this was for a decades project that the students could do. And then they could fill in their choice. And again, so long as they had a rationale, they could change any of these columns. So they did the role, then they picked the audience. So is it, for example, today's society, and then the format, a movie, podcast, essay, poster, and topic, why this decade is important to our history. The artist, so attackers, critics of the decade, could be our current decade, sculpture, painting, etc. The beauty and or importance of the decade, a research persona, an outsider visiting your decade, diorama, scale model, movie, podcast, whatever they want, they can propose something. What you need to know so the topic might be what you need to know if you wanted to live during this time. And again, this involves a lot of research, going into this type of project. Another example, so this is an example of a raft that we created for students to research a renowned scientist from an underserved population. So for example, and again, you'll see at the bottom, there's choices for them to be able to write in. So Thomas Edison, gifted inventor who also had a hearing disability. So the audience might be future inventors. The format might be a diary entry, or they can propose another format. And the topic might be, my disability did not hold me back, it helped me succeed. Or Katherine Johnson, Black female mathematician whose groundbreaking work for NASA was documented in the film Hidden Figures. So the audience could be society. Format, public broadcaster, again, propose another format. So more Black women are needed in STEM fields might be the topic. So this is just to get your ideas going of ways to, engage your students. If you're testing, for example, or you're assessing research skills, this could be a really powerful way to build in those connections while also tying it to the skills that you're assessing. Amy had mentioned, this idea, and I'm sure you're familiar with chunking, scaffolding, but we just want to emphasize, and this is a form that we have in the Padlet for project timeline. Even for adults who have skill sets, when we're given a huge project, it can become very overwhelming very quickly if we don't break it up into manageable parts. So these are skills, self-regulation skills that we need to be teaching our students, and especially our underserved students who, we need to be building that self-efficacy. So with the project timeline, you'll see that, and you can do this together. So what are the steps in the process? What are the specific tasks I need to complete? When is it expected that I'm going to complete this? When will you check in with me about this? And what are words of encouragement and actions to help me make progress on this? So with chunking, even with choices, large assignments may seem overwhelming to students. That was what Amy was talking about earlier. Choice is fantastic, but we need to put some structure around choice. And that is what a lot of the research tells us. So they may be excited to begin a project, but feelings of frustration may soon take over, especially if they discover the project requires skills or knowledge they have not learned yet or mastered. That's where that learning needs survey that we showed you earlier is so incredibly important. So we can see the types of supports we may need to build into a larger project like that so students can feel successful. And I'm going to share with you tomorrow an actual example from one of my own students. So you may need to break large projects into smaller components to make them more manageable. And after each component, do a check-in, and give that constructive, positive feedback. So as students complete each component, they should receive the positive, constructive feedback to help build their self-efficacy and send them the message that, you know what, you can complete this larger project. So with any kind of independent investigation, with any kind of larger project, we just need to not be setting kids off on their own. We need to provide that scaffolding. We need to provide the guidance. We need to facilitate that process to really help not only build those cognitive and academic skills, but also those affective, social, emotional skills as well. So Amy, I think this is you.
Let me start over. If you have not taken a look at the chat yet, make sure that you do. There are lots of good recommendations that are popping up from different people in that. So that's a really good resource for each other right now. I noticed that somebody mentioned, I don't remember now who it was, teaching tolerance. That is a resource that I absolutely love. And just today, There was a reprint from them in my inbox with and about inviting contemporary American Indian peoples into the classroom. And I thought, well, what a great resource to pop into my inbox today. So I'll post that in the resources in Padlet as well. So process evaluation. Jenny actually got at this when she was talking about chunking projects. So with the project, we're obviously focused to a degree on the product, but that process is so very important for all of our students, for underserved gifted learners to recognize that this is valuable too. It's not just the product that we're interested in. We're interested in the learning and growth that happens along the way as well. So this process evaluation rubric, this is really designed to be used with something specific. So a specific assignment, a specific activity, a specific project, and it's to be used in addition to, or sometimes maybe instead of, an evaluation of that final project. It depends on what type of growth you're evaluating with your students at the time. This is great for celebrating things that they have done well, growth that you've seen in different areas. For example, I didn't give up when I got stuck. That is something to celebrate, especially if this is a pattern that you have seen with this student in the past. It's also a great resource for setting future goals. Okay, I did give up. What do I need to put in place, or how do we need to move forward from here? What goals can we set? How do we chunk it out? How do we make it manageable? And how do we help make sure that you have the support that you need to be successful going forward, or successful next time? We like to use these a couple of different ways, but one way that's been really beneficial is for the child to, or the student to, complete a version of this, and you complete a version of this, and then you compare. Are you aligned on what you see as, I put enough time into planning? The child may be saying, yes. The student says, yes, I put plenty of time into planning. And you're saying, based on what I see, I'm not sure that there was enough planning. I'm not sure that I'm seeing eye to eye with you. And so it's a great place for starting a discussion. It's a great place for building understanding. So that's one way that you can use this type of process evaluation rubric. Again, this is uploaded in the resources. Another resource that we did not develop, but that we really, really like, and just looking at it, you can tell it's Carol Dweck, based on mindset, fixed mixed growth. This is an effort rubric. This is designed more for a general evaluation of effort. It's not so specifically focused on a particular activity, but it looks at taking on challenges, learning from mistakes, accepting feedback and criticism. The other categories are like practicing and applying strategies, perseverance, asking questions, and then something about taking risks. So this is just the first part of it to give you an example. But this is another really good resource, and I don't think that I uploaded this one into Padlet, but we will make sure that you have access to this too, because we think this is another really good way to get at how important that effort is. Effort is important, and we need to recognize it and celebrate it with our students, with these students.
So one of the last things we want to talk to you about before we break out again is engaging students in higher level thinking. So we may never truly know our underserved learners' capabilities unless we offer opportunities for them to engage in complex thinking activities. So incorporating higher level questions into discussion and inquiry-based activities can be a powerful way to engage students in learning at a deeper level. So I want to share some research. Some of this is my own research that was published recently with families of young children who are high potential and also had disabilities. So when we're talking about higher level questions, HLQs can be used to stimulate and challenge gifted students and students who demonstrate gifted potential. We know this, the research tells us this. HLQs aid in the development of critical thinking skills, creativity, higher order thinking skills, and more complex verbal responses, especially in young children. Again, research tells us this. Lower level questions, many of which simply require students to recall basic factual information, are most prominent in school settings. One of the participants in an experimental research study that I had done recently was actually a teacher. She was an elementary school teacher. And when she was trained in how to do this higher level questioning with her child at home, she actually started to reflect more on the questions she was asking in her own classroom. And she had said, it was really funny. I really thought I was asking higher level questions a lot of the time, but after doing this, I realized I wasn't. I was actually asking lower level questions most of the time. This made me more cognizant that I need to be embedding opportunities for higher level questioning. Lower level questions elicit lower level responses more often than not from students, and they don't allow them to fully develop or demonstrate higher order thinking skills. With that said, there's a time and place for everything. There's a time when lower level questions are absolutely necessary. You need to make sure that you are able to get, basic definitions and facts from kids to assess their basic understanding before you can sometimes move on to those higher level, more abstract concepts. So this isn't to throw out lower level questioning. This is just to make us more intentional about our consistent use of higher level questioning. So this is a bookmark that I developed for the research study that we trained my co-investigator and I trained families to use with their children during shared reading at home. So this is based on Bloom's taxonomy. I actually uploaded this as a Word document in the Padlet, again, just to honor the fact that you may need to, depending on the age level, this was for younger children. Most of our students were around kindergarten aged. So if you need to increase the complexity of some of these question starters, then you can modify it. It's in a Word document. So we just basically folded this and laminated it, and the parents had it as a resource. And this is also a great potential resource in the future for kids to have as well. So analysis question stems, you can see, describe the theme, creation questions, evaluation questions, and then we have those lower level questions based on just the stems, remembering questions, understanding questions, application questions. And I wanted to pull in just an actual example from the research study from the parent-child dyads. So just to show you just a difference. And this study actually did show a causal relationship between the higher level questions and increased language complexity in these young children with disabilities. So here's the lower level questioning example, one of them from the study. So the caregiver asked the child, "What does invisible mean?" The child's response, "You can't see it." End of story. Okay, forward response. So I want to show you now an example from the same caregiver of a higher level questioning and the response from the child. So the caregiver asks, "If you were Russell and you had just left your home, how would you feel?" How would you feel? The child's response, "Kind of scared and excited because I wouldn't know many of the people. And I would also be excited because I'm not usually out of where I live. I'm in a different place from where I live. So I'm in the country. It would be amazing for me to go see the jungle because I don't usually get to see that experience because it's so far away." We don't get responses like that unless we phrase the questions in such a way that elicit those open-ended, beautiful responses from children and give them the opportunity to show us what they're passionate about, what they know, the connections that they can make. So I guess, my call here is just, be very cognizant of the questions you're asking. And sometimes it might be even nice to have like a bookmark like this. It's just a resource to kind of prompt and say, okay, I want to get in like a few higher level questions, and I want to make sure that I'm really getting at more kids too in the classroom and not necessarily just the kids that are constantly answering. So maybe even giving them time to process before they share. I saw a comment about, these could lead to just great discussions, and they absolutely can. It doesn't just have to be based on shared book reading. Amy, is there anything else you wanted to add about that?
This is an example, especially for like second language learners. If you know there are certain questions that you're going to be asking And a lot of this will just come naturally in the discussion. But if you know there are certain things that you want to ask, giving them an opportunity to take it home or think about it ahead of time and figure out how they want to share that information with you is a good example of what we were talking about earlier.
So we only have a short amount of time left, and we are going to do a quick 10-minute breakout, and we are not going to have a 3-minute break after this one, unfortunately. So we are just going to break for 10 minutes, and we'd like you to discuss just the following 2 questions. So how do you respectfully differentiate for your students and for your underserved high potential students in particular? Which of the presented differentiation strategies have you used, and or which would you like to try in the future? And if you can discuss ways in which you already are engaging your students in higher level thinking. So ways that you're already doing that and how you could improve your current practices in this area. So
we very much recognize that there are probably experts out there that we the depth and complexity frame. Last activity that we have for you is a reflection, personal learning priorities. Again, beginning is you're aware and you want to try. Developing, you have tried or are trying. Leading, you are consistently aware, implementing changes, and making others aware. So just personal reflection on these statements. First one, I connect learning to students' background experiences and make sure that the learning materials represent their cultural backgrounds. I identify and support students' academic, cognitive, and affective needs during group work as needed. I scaffold learning by chunking assignments and projects to build student self-efficacy. When evaluating students' work, I consider their effort and how they engaged in the learning process. And then the last one, I ask students to think and respond at a higher level, analyzing, evaluating, and creating knowledge. So take a couple of minutes.